Welcome to the Body Smart Podcast, where we remove roadblocks to fitness and health to empower you to master your health habits. We help you become body smart.
All right. Welcome on this fabulous morning to our Life Design call. We're excited to have this topic. It's something that I think is really important, and just a more positive message behind maybe missteps that we make, things that don't necessarily go our way. There's a way to think about that helps us move forward instead of wallow in that misstep. And so I'm even careful to call the things that we do that are missteps bad or mistakes or things like that, because they are loaded words. They come with a lot of connotation of, that means if you did something bad, we assume that we are bad. And that's just not the case. It's honestly just part of the learning process. We don't fault a child for falling down while they're learning to walk. We don't, beat up our kids for the fact that they didn't get 100% on their math test. We take a look and say, okay, do you need help with math? If you didn't get the score the score you studied for, then can we help you to do better, right? Can we get you a tutor? Can we, find a way to help? We don't beat them up for it. We don't tear them down for that, right? We find ways to help them improve. And for some reason, we don't do that with ourselves. Instead, we beat ourselves up. We tend to be more harsh with ourselves and not really give ourselves the same kind of grace. So, that example of a kid not doing well in math, I think everybody has experienced that at some point in time. And beating somebody up, tearing them down, that doesn't help. It's one thing if they haven't studied and haven't done their homework. That's obviously an area we can start. But what's the reason that they're not doing it, or things like that? Helping somebody to troubleshoot where they're at and what they're doing. That's what this is all about. That's what this Life Design call and what so much of the Becoming Body Smart program is all about, is really to help people troubleshoot their life and lifestyle, so that either if they're not doing their homework, so that they can, and if they are doing their homework and still not quite doing as well as what they've studied for. That was always my prayer before a test, was not that I would do well on the test, because I thought that was a little unfair to ask. I always would pray that I will be able to at least do as well as what I studied for the test, right? Mm-hmm. That I can remember the things that I studied, so I can do as well as what I prepared for. I thought that was fair to ask. Because, why would I be able to get some miracle if I hadn't prepared for the miracle, I guess, right? And so, anyway, getting a little off topic there, but that idea of it being a learning process, I guess, is really important. And so trial and learning versus trial and error. We've got to stop seeing things we've got to stop seeing errors as a bad thing, I think, is the key. We tend to assign good and bad to the decisions we make and to the things that happen in our life. And so when we assign them bad qualities, we beat ourselves up over that. And so what is, the step to move forward and not beat ourselves up so much and not have such a negative connotation toward everything? I think we've got to think that we got to stop assigning the bad label to things or the error label to things, and think This is just something that I can learn from, right? I know. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, so unfortunately, when we kind of get into that place where we are so focused on like the badness of the decision, we run into a couple problems. Um, One is that it kind of blinds us from seeing potential solutions, right? We're so concerned that we messed
Totally.
up, we can't see the lesson in there, which
That's
which
so
is
true.
unfortunate, right? And
We
and
spend
two,
our
like we're
whole
less
time
likely
beating
to ask
ourselves
for
up.
help. Yeah, yeah, and we're less likely to ask for help because we begin to think there's a character defect in us. And
Right.
so, like, I know for me, one of the difficulties that I had while I was in school was asking questions, even when I didn't understand, because I didn't want to look stupid, right? I didn't want to admit that I didn't know, and like, and I was thinking to myself, well, I should know this. All of my classmates know the answer, which wasn't the case, right? Chances are, when you have a question, a lot of other people have a question. Um, I think sometimes we think that we're alone in things, or that like no one else has gone what we get through, or what we're going through. And the case is like there's a lot of shared human experience, right? A lot of us make the same mistakes, and so like when we can just recognize that instead of this terrible thing, like it's an opportunity to grow, it's an opportunity to learn, and being willing to ask questions, being willing to reflect, right? Whether we're asking questions of those who have gone through it or are in a position to know more, or whether we're asking questions of ourselves and reflecting on the experience and saying,
Mm.
well, what went wrong, or what could have gone better, or what can I do next time? Like, what can make this situation better?
Yeah.
Um, and, with that, I think another important point is sometimes when um, like we assume that the decision making process was bad when it doesn't give us the outcome that we want. That's not necessarily the case, right? Like sometimes our outcomes are the result of luck or are a result of competing external things, right? So like take even like let's say you're playing a game. Like let's you're it's a basketball game or football game or a soccer game, right? Like you and your team have prepared well. You've practiced all your drills. You've shown up to every practice. You've talked about mindset, and you've also talked about the specific skills and worked on those. And then you come up against a stronger, better team, right? And you lose that game. That doesn't mean that there's a bad decision making process going into that. It's just that sometimes, like like I said, there's other circumstances, right? For that reason, in that context, the team won. Um, because sometimes we make the mistake that when we win, maybe we just got lucky and there was a terrible decision process that went into making that decision. And so, like
Right.
when we look at trial and learning versus trial and error, like we can see um, places to learn in both of our successes, or both in our successes and in our quote unquote failures, right?
Right.
I think the only true failure is that we stop trying, because really, if we're doing this trial and learning process, then failures are stepping stones to greater achievement, to doing better the next time.
Right.
But what's really important is regularly reflecting on our decision-making process. Are we, as you said, Cameron, like, help me remember, to the level that I studied, right? Like,
Right.
will you help me recall the things that I spent time with? And so when we're making decisions, when we're doing things, like if we come back and say like, okay, did I follow the proper steps to get the result that I want? Maybe I still
Right.
might not get the result I want, but at least if I followed the steps and I followed the process and I'm going back and taking a look at that, then I can always find, well, maybe I can try this. Maybe I can try that, right? We'll
Right.
tweak this a little bit and maybe have a different outcome the next time. But
Right.
that reflection process is so crucial to being able to learn and grow, and again use those things as stepping stones rather than as like knives or
Right.
arrows to stab ourselves with.
Right, exactly. So I mean that totally brings up that next point of really all errors are, or mistakes or things that we did bad or poorly, really all those are data points, right? They're not negative things necessarily. They're data points for learning. So, in the context of a team that has practiced or a student that has studied, you can't expect a better outcome than how you've prepared, right? Sometimes we get lucky, but my son was actually just telling me about a standardized test that they have to take in elementary school, and one of his buddies just like filled in bubbles. He was done in like 10 minutes because he just filled in bubbles because he didn't care, and wound up getting like in the top 2/3, and it's just like that's another reason why standardized testing is just so bad. Anyway, so he did fine, and all he did was fill in bubbles. So anyway, that's totally an aside. But that idea of you can only do as well as what you prepare for, but no matter what, you can use that instead of beating yourself up for not being so prepared or for losing the game and coming up short. You can look at, okay, these are all just data points. These are all just learning points. And it's when you are reflective that you can take that data and use it to benefit yourself. So it's about asking the questions. It's about, reflecting upon and thinking deeper about those items so that you can, dive deep into what you can do next time around to have more success, to be to grow from it, so to learn from it, so hence trial and learning versus trial and error. Like you said, those are just arrows and stones that we throw at ourselves. Self-flagellation. We whip ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that we are not good enough, not worth it enough, not whatever enough. That characteristic that we either wish we had or are trying to develop, instead of saying, okay, here's what I've learned to not do, and here's what I've learned maybe to try. But it's going to be another trial, and that's okay. It's okay to try again and see where we're at. See if that made us make more progress. But we gather data points. Like, okay, so studying in that way for that test, that didn't work. So let's not study that way again, because I obviously didn't do as well as I would have liked. So for the next test, I'm going to try to study this way, or I'm going to get this type of help, or I'm going to whatever. Or for the football game, for example, okay, so they beat us. We did well here, here, and here. The areas that they beat us were this and this. Let's use that to improve. So let's work on those areas of our game so that we can rise up to their level and match them. Versus, we're terrible. They're so good. They're, like when you do that in your head, the next time you play them, you're going to lose because you've already blown them up so big in your head that they have all the answers and you don't. And you're a poorer team than they are. Versus, okay, they do these things well. We can learn from what they were doing. We can learn from what we weren't doing or were doing to get better. They're really all just data points. It's not right and wrong. And I would argue that that's true in all aspects of life, whether that's, our physical, training, our athletic training of like, okay, so my legs were a little too sore after that run and it affected me for the last couple of days. So data point, running 10 miles and doing a ton of vert when I haven't done that in a while, maybe not a good idea. So let's structure that a little bit more and try to, taper that differently next time around or whatever that is. But also I would say you can use that in relationships. Okay, so that conversation didn't go very well. Right? Okay, next time maybe I should approach that conversation around whatever those, tough topics are, finances, maybe the way somebody's treating you and you want to stick up for yourself, but in a way that doesn't put them on the defensive as well. and just talk about how things make you feel and whatever. So you go back and say, okay, the way I brought that up, obviously I was a little too defensive, or maybe I was a little too, attacking them back. What can I do next time around to approach that topic in a way that shows more compassion and understanding for their point of view as well? Acknowledging them first and where they're coming from first, asking them if that's true. Like, I see where you're coming from with this, acknowledging their point of view, and then they're more perceptive to your point of view, right? So, and maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. And so you have to go back to the drawing board and kind of restructure, retry that. But it's all about gathering data points until you can figure out like what's the winning formula. And then often the winning formula doesn't last forever and you have to keep retooling. But it's not that you made a mistake or that there's some fatal flaw in you because we had missteps. Missteps are just part of the learning process. Even in spiritual or religious views, we like to ascribe things as being sin or being bad or negative, and I would argue that those are really just learning points, right? It's not that you are a bad person because you are not perfect. It is that you are trying to learn, and like a child trying to ride a bike or walk for the first time or whatever, we're not like, oh my gosh, they're just terrible because they can't figure out how to pedal. And so they keep falling over because they don't know how to pedal, and that's what keeps them upright. I'm sure that there are so many analogies we could make with that to our, that spiritual aspect of our life too, of like, we just got to learn how to pedal. And so those mistakes that we make, those missteps that we make, are really just data points for learning. And it's like, okay, so that wasn't the way to do that. Let's retool and try again. And that's what it's really all about, is that it's a process of self-improvement and not self-flagellation.
So I like what Edison said. I looked up this quote. So someone asked him, about failing so many times with different inventions, right? Especially the light bulb. I think he tried like 1,000 different things before it worked. And he said, I have not failed 10,000 times. I've successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work, right? Yeah. And so reframing it in that way. And I like that idea of looking at things like a scientist, right? I worked in a research lab for a while, and it was interesting, right? Among scientists.
The mice killer.
We won't get into that but it was interesting watching some of the different personalities in there, and watching some of the scientists that would allow the scientific process to kind of run its course, and then kind of where do we go from here, and other ones that would completely kind of fall apart for a few days. And so, right, you think about it, what's your hypothesis? And then you develop an experiment to test that hypothesis, and then based on the results, you make a conclusion. So either it confirms the hypothesis or it refutes the hypothesis, right? So again, like Cameron talked, it's gathering those data points. And sometimes it was really frustrating, right? You spend all of this time in an experiment just to, find out the thing didn't work, right? Or you replicate someone else's results, which is great for learning, but it doesn't necessarily get you accolades as a scientist, right? Like we in science, it's like the big flashy thing. Oh, they learned this. But sometimes what's just as effective is learning that something doesn't work, right? Because then we don't have to keep butting our heads against the wall trying to do something that way. And so the scientists that could take that and be like, wow, well, that sucks that all that time that I spent, I just got this result. What do I want to design next time? And they'd go on to the next process, and they'd iterate, learning more and becoming a better scientist, and becoming more educated on that specific thing that you're pursuing, versus other people would just be like, oh, my experiment failed. Like, what am I going to do next time? I'm a terrible scientist. Like I saw these experiences happening to some of these scientists. And so, what we don't want to say is you got to be this like cold, calculating person. You can never feel emotion, right? Like that's not what it's about. I think it's important to kind of experience that full range of human emotions, but be able to like take a step back from things, right? Get that 30,000 foot view, and use those data points to move you in the direction of where you want to be, which is that last point, right?
Right.
Are the decisions I'm making moving me towards or away from my goal? And even when you make choices or things happen that are not consistent with your goal, it's easy to course correct. So I really like the example of flying from, let's say, San Francisco to New York. If even though they have the course, like they're always going a little bit on or off that course all the way there, right? Like little degrees here, little degrees there. But they're correcting often enough that even over thousands of miles, they still get to the destination, right? They still get to New York, right? It's not just this, the plane stays perfectly straight the whole time and goes exactly, right? Like there's all sorts of things that are moving it to one side or another. But that constant reevaluation, that constant correction keeps them in line with their course. Versus like if you kind of veer off and then you don't correct, right? In the beginning, that's not a big deal, but over time you get further and further away from that destination. And so the idea is that like you're still gonna, like things are not always gonna work out exactly like you want it to. But as long as you're regularly taking a look at that, using those data points to course correct and say, okay, like that wasn't in line with my goal, but here's what I need to do the next time. Like this is gonna be more in line with that goal. Making those constant corrections again and again and again and again is just going to keep you on that path directed towards where you want to be in the end.
Right. And so that's, with those data points, that's exactly what you need to do is like, okay, that didn't get me closer to my goal. That didn't get me the result I wanted.
That didn't work.
Yeah, well, that didn't work. And honestly, you can use this in all aspects of life with food decisions, with exercise decisions, with relationship decisions, with spiritual decisions, with parenting decisions, with whatever. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work. And you either, if it's a relationship thing, you can either sit down with that person and say, okay, obviously that didn't work, let's work through this again, and do that with them. If it's which I think is actually really powerful to do in a parenting situation, to sit down and say with your child and say, hey, obviously that conversation did not go the way either of us wanted it to. How do we reframe that? How do we, that's really powerful to involve them in the parenting process rather than, parent down to them, if that makes sense. And that helps them be part of the solution as well. And so, learning in that way of involving others in your learning process can be really helpful. But it's got to move you toward your goal. And so that's kind of a whatever it takes type thing. Like you keep trying different things until you discover what it takes. Until you find the filament in the light bulb. You keep plugging things in. And that can be fatiguing for sure. But that process really does help move you closer and closer towards your goal. And so that's the point of all of life, honestly, to me, is just trial and learn. And some trials are more of a trial, as it were, right? Some are a little harsher to learn and harder to learn the lesson that we're supposed to be learning out of this. That can be harder sometimes than others, but it's okay. Use the data points that you collected from that most recent trial and say, okay, what worked, what didn't, how do I move forward from here? And we really can help ourselves be more successful. We don't have to keep beating our head against the same wall. We might as well try a new wall instead. And eventually, though, we'll find the weak spot that we break through and make progress. And so, honestly, in reframing those things, in reframing error, as just data points for learning, it really can help us to have a more positive outlook with it, to stop beating ourselves up and throwing stones at ourselves, and instead really move forward with more faith in ourselves and in our ability to do, with more belief that we can learn, that we can achieve, that we can like take those steps to moving forward. I can't think of any one book that I've read or any listening to anyone's story that just went linearly, where they just success after success after success. Most of the time when you read somebody's memoirs, they talk about failure after failure after failure until finally something worked out. And then they were able to learn from all those failures and then build success on success on success on success. But it's rarely that they just like cruised through and everything was okay. Some people just fail lighter and more frequently. They move from failure to failure more frequently, more quickly. And so they don't fall, they don't crash quite as hard with each mistake or misstep. And I think that's the key, is fail, dare greater, and fail more rapidly, so that each failure is not so crushing, and so that we can keep learning those data points and get to the end result faster. And so that puts us out of our comfort zone, to fail rapidly and to fail greatly, to like really go after it. So whether that's a conversation, to really confront that conversation and be open to say like, hey, that didn't go well. That conversation we tried to have, that obviously we did not approach that the right way. How do we do that better? And just listen maybe for a second, hear what they have to say about how it went. And then you share your feelings about how it went. And that takes a lot of courage and emotional intelligence and things like that, and may not go well the first time. But there, you learn from that too and see, okay, what's a better approach for that? But opening yourself up to failure, to it not going well, is the fastest way to learn how it will go well.
No.
And so it does take some courage. It does take some trial and learning, but when we do that, we really can learn in life.
Yeah. There's two last things I want to hit real quick in what you said. So that one is being open to what other people have to say, right? Like if we close ourselves off in the learning process, then we're going to have to deal with a lot of learning experiences that we wouldn't necessarily have to go through if we opened ourselves up to the learning and experiences of others.
Even we have to learn our own lessons.
Yeah, right?
Versus learning from somebody else, right?
Which takes a lot longer. And so that's the thing, like it might be really uncomfortable to learn from other people, especially when that learning involves like someone that we hurt, like learning what we could have done better, like how we might have been able to change. And that takes some humility. Like sometimes that takes a lot of humility to be like, oh man, I done messed up. But when we open ourselves to the learning and to the criticism even of other people, like those are all data points too. Like now, we might weight that a criticism of some people more or less than others, right? Like some random person on the street that shouts like, well, you're an ugly son of a gun, right? Yeah, maybe don't.
Well, it's true, but what can I do about it?
Right. But so that actually brings up two things. Like one, like there's some people that we're going to want to take more weight of, right? People that have been through experiences and come out successful on the other side, we should probably weigh more heavily than people on the sidelines that are telling us, what we should or shouldn't do without being in the arena. But two, like sometimes we take that data and it's like, well, I can't really do anything about this. And so like, okay, right. I'll take that in and I'll move forward. But the second thing that I want to look at is time. Cameron referenced this, but if we just take snapshots of our lives, then portions of them might seem like failures. And if that's all we focus on, then we miss out on those successes. So take someone like Steve Jobs, for example, right? The 90s, he gets kicked out of the own company that he built, right? And like, if you were just to take him at that snapshot in time and be like, oh yeah, like he was a failure, Apple was a failure. But then we see him like learn some of those really hard lessons, come back, and now like you think about, as much as Cameron has some things to say about Apple, right? Like you think about how successful that company's become, the iPhone and the Apple computer and all of those things like are, now we look at Steve Jobs and be like, oh, like what a success, and he did all these great things. But it's because we opened up and looked at a greater period of time rather than focusing so narrowly on that period of failure. Like all of us are going to have periods where we're failing more often and where we're succeeding more often, and being able to learn the lessons of the failures and the successes and just having that wider span, right? Like, it's hard, right? Like in those moments where we're having a really hard trial, things aren't going well. Like it's really difficult to be reflective and be like, okay, what can I learn from this? Like, how can I improve?
Yeah.
But ultimately, like I said, the only permanent failure is when we stop trying.
Right.
So many paths to learning. There's so many paths to success. And I think that's the thing of like looking at life as a journey of growth and of learning and of improvement, rather than as like, I have to have specific things done at specific times in specific ways or I'm a failure, right? Like it's often about reframing.
Right. You look at the Phil Knight story with Nike. He failed so many times. But the thing is he doubled down on it instead of giving up or bailing or like being hesitant to move forward. He always doubled down on his failures and was like, okay, so that didn't work, so we're going to do it this way and twice as big. And yeah, I mean, he'd been kicked out of like 2 or 3 different banks where they were like, yeah, sorry, we're no longer going to hold a line of credit for you. So he owed millions of dollars and found a way through because he would just double down on it. Like, and that's the thing we have to do, is fail more quickly and just keep pushing forward and being receptive to the criticism or correction or help from others. Really, I do think, like you said, is such a big key, because we don't have to keep touching the hot stove, right? I think we can learn from other people saying, no, that stove is hot, stay away.
Don't do it.
But sometimes we could just design a better glove so you can touch the hot stove, right? There's 2 ways to do that. It's avoid touching the hot stove, or say, I'm going to just put a better glove on so I can touch it. There's more than one way to do that, and that's what that trial and learning process is. The other thing is when you accidentally guide somebody else to touch the hot stove, when your advice is bad, that is often more painful than us touching the hot stove, right? When we feel like we've led other people into bad situations, that hurts, I think, even more deeply than our own errors. And so that is, again, though, something you can learn from, and you've got to confront that. Otherwise, that will always be. And I think parents feel that way a lot. Like I've put my kids in a situation where they can't thrive, and confronting that and dealing with that and learning and moving forward is gonna help them more and help you more than just avoiding that altogether. And so really it's about gathering those data points, confronting the hard things that we need to do to learn from it, and make sure that whatever we're trying to do in the future is moving us closer toward our goal and not further away, and we'll be successful in the long run. And that's the thing, we're all doing the long play, whether we want to or not. We're all in it for the long play. So zoom out, look at that 30,000 foot view, and then zoom back in and move forward. That's kind of all we can do, and just keep moving forward, and we find success eventually. It takes time. It's a process for sure, but do it as a process of trial and learning, instead of trial and error, and you'll feel a lot better about yourself. There will be a lot less beating yourself up. And you'll actually be able to be successful because you have positivity in those changes instead of negativity in the changes. Anyway, I've got to go. I got to hop on a call. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Sorry about yesterday with our technical difficulties. We'll catch you later.
Thanks for listening to the Body Smart podcast. Join us in the Body Smart community on Facebook to share your successes or ask a question for our next episode. Now get out there and take the next step toward living your active lifestyle.